This is a Coast eClinic by Ed Merrin on refining the techniques of smartphone focus stacking for layout photography.
And now what you should see the title of the clinic on the screen. Is that true?
You have the title up.
Okay, so that means that it works. Okay, so here we go. Basically, the whole point of this is that when you go around taking pictures of real trains, most of the time you're walking around on the ground and you're looking up at the trains. But most of the pictures that you could take of model railroads are ordinarily from higher up. So if you wanted to reproduce that look that you get, which is my goal, you have trouble with regular camera. It's just too big. Even if you get it on the layout, it's too high up. So smartphones have come along and they're small enough to fit right in there, and they have their lenses right on the bottom edge. The only problem is that they have terrible depth of field problems, which we'll get into a little bit. So fortunately, we've been rescued by the growing availability with digital techniques of focus stacking, and that makes it possible to do this. So just to illustrate what I'm talking about, here's some prototype photos. The ones on the top kind of look more like what we get when we just take our cameras and take pictures of model railroads. So we're up above at some degree or another. You can see all the tops of the trains. And then on the other hand, if you're walking around with your own camera on the ground, like I did here when I was a pimply-faced teenager, you get a different look entirely. You get this kind of sweeping wide angle thing, and you can't see what's on the top of the trains. So it's a whole different look. And you can see that depth of field is going to be a problem if you could get there, because you got tracks here and then you got train stuff there. And in these prototype photos, they more or less are sharp pretty far back. They start to get gradually less distinct as you get back there. So that's kind of our goal, or was my goal, is to get something like that. So depth of field has plagued model railroad photography from the get-go. And we used to have to deal with it by getting as small a lens aperture as we could get with the equipment we had. If you want, heroic people could use hyperfocal distances calculated, but fortunately we have focus stacking now, which has other names, as you see. And what you do is you basically take a bunch of pictures, the same picture, basically, multiple times, but each time you focus on a different point in the scene, from the close parts to the far parts. And then you combine those images together and you wind up with one image that is, you hope, sharp all the way through. So model railroaders didn't invent this, but we've adapted it. And there's lots of instructions you can get on the web from people who aren't model railroad photographers, but take other kinds of pictures that can tell you a lot of details. But basically there's 3 steps. You have to take the pictures, and they have to be as identical as you can make them. They're never going to be totally identical because, as we'll see, talk a little bit about later, each time you pick a different focus point on the scene, it actually changes the focal length of the lens slightly. And so you get different sizes of images at each focal point. And it creates an effect that they call focus breathing or something like that. But at any rate, we can deal with that. Or some computer programmer deals with it. So then we have to get the pictures to a computer. And there's different ways to do that. Right now, what I've got my phone and my computer both linked together, synchronized using the cloud. So whatever I take on my phone, if I wait a few minutes, shows up on the computer anyways. But in the past, I've emailed the pictures to myself or, plugged in the phone, whatever, but anyways, you have to get it there. And then you use software to do all the stuff I was describing. And then you have an image that you can do the stuff that you usually do. And you need to have, in order to do all this, obviously you need to have a camera where you can change the focus, whether you're doing smartphone or regular cameras, focus stacking. And you have to keep the camera still. Regular camera, you can use a tripod or bean balls and whatnot. Doesn't work too well with smartphones because they kind of lift up the phone too high, and then that defeats the purpose. So you have to have some kind of stand that keeps the camera still. And to avoid shaking the camera around, it's good to have a remote shutter, and there's a number of Bluetooth focus shutter triggers available, and they're not expensive. I have one on my keychain basically, and that's how I trip the shutter. And then of course you have to have a computer to do all this stuff, and you have to have the software that does focus stacking. So just a few words on picking the software. Most of the time when you go on the web, you find that people that do this a lot, professionally or otherwise, use Photoshop more often than anything else. And it may be just because that's what they're used to using. Photoshop does do photo editing, or less expensive version of Photoshop, Photoshop Elements also does that. And then these other less expensive packages for photo editing, both which are very good. On1 Photo Raw is really popular now. They also have it built in. But when you go to the model railroad literature, you find people are using Helicon Focus more than anything else, is what it looks like to me. And it has some advantages. It's a specialized program. You can change the algorithms, gives you choices of how the sharpness of an image is calculated. Obviously, you have to be able to do that in order to know what to include in the composite. And then there's another that I haven't used, but a number of photographers use, Zering Stacker, which is similarly has some options. I don't know what Photoshop uses for their algorithm, by the way, and you can't find out. So it's some kind of privileged information. But even if you knew, you can't change it anyways. So I used to use Photoshop all the time since I had it, but I've totally changed over to Helicon Focus even since I last gave this clinic. So I'm going to kind of show some features of both just to show you. And here's Photoshop. Gets a little involved. The first thing that happens is you have to, you've taken all these pictures, you have it sitting on your computer. You have to do something with those images, get them into Photoshop. And what you do is you basically select them, all the pictures in your photo browser, which would be either Bridge or Lightroom. And there's a command, load into Photoshop layers. And you select that command, and automatically Photoshop appears, and a new file arises. And this is a window that shows up next to that file. And all of a sudden, each of the pictures that you've taken are now a layer in a new Photoshop file. And that's what you work with. You select them all, and then you go to the auto align command on the edit menu, and you see it's kind of clicked on auto, and you go okay. Something happens, there's a window with a progress thing. A minute or so later, it's done. And then you, from the same menu, select auto blend, and you select stack images. Obviously, we're not interested in panoramas. And this is what you wind up with. You wind up with this new file. It's merged all those layers together, but it's only included, we hope, the sharp parts. And these are masks that it's created to make that happen. So anything that's black doesn't show up in the final, and the things that are white do. So this, these are in order of nearest down to farthest. And you can see that, like here's the front of the locomotive, as you go back, more distant things show up. So that's how Photoshop works. And then with Helicon Focus, it's a little easier. Basically, you take the thumbnails of your files and just drag them over to the window, and poof, this thing here shows up down on the bottom, actually, and you get the same idea here. You get this list of things here. These are all the files, and then there's a little. What you see here is the selected file. So if you want to see what this one looks like, you can just do that. And then there's these choices to make. And usually for the kinds of pictures that we take, the C, the pyramidal method, is usually the best. So you select that, and then you press the render button, and here it gets rendered. And here's the final output. And then here's the last image furthest away. You can see it's selected, so that's what's showing up there. And that's important because for later, that they both are together on the screen. And then way in the back corner here is your picture. So if you decided that you wanted to try a different option, the weighted average, for example, or the depth chart rather, you click that and press render again. And rather than losing what you've done, you have two available, so you can see which one you like better. So it's kind of handy. So here's some examples from what I consider the old days when I used a DSLR to do this, and of what you can do with photo stacking. The problem, of course, is that you're looking from the outside of the scene because you've got your camera on a tripod and it's off the layout. And sometimes you even have to use a little telephoto effect to get a decent looking picture. And they're nice. It's just not what I'm looking for. But you can see what photo stacking enables you to do. You've got, like in this picture, this is an N scale scene, and you've got this tree and this hill perfectly in focus, as well as these guys back here and so forth. It's true. Even I like these. I like looking under bridges and seeing something sharp on the other side. I always get a kick out of that. However, I want to point out that I was following the old idea of using the smallest lens opening possible on the camera. And the lenses that I was using were pretty good. They went way beyond f/22. The problem is that once you start getting smaller in f/8, for most lenses, the sharpness of the lens goes down. So it's better to stick with something like f/8 to get the maximum sharpness, which means you have to take more images. So I got by with only having to do 3 or 4 for these guys. That wouldn't work for larger lens openings. Anyways, so let's move on to a different way of doing it, where you just put your phone in a little holder and stick it down there, and bingo, there's a picture. All you have to do is focus stack. This is relatively a few years old, and I built a little stand for it, the camera out of styrene, and it's a lot simpler. You get inside the scene and you're down on the ground. That was the whole point. And this kind of shows you with a little more updated picture. This is a stand I use now. It's a little higher up, 10 millimeters, but here's the camera for the phone way down here. And so in HO scale, it's about 6 feet up. But if you put a regular camera down on the layout surface, it's twice as high. So, and that makes a difference. It makes a real difference. So this is the camera I'm using now. It's about the same. It's a little bit higher up. So this is Android cameras. I'm not familiar with them all, but it's probably similar. This is the nature of the camera that you're using. It's good to know that as photographers, we don't like to have mysteries, and sometimes Apple doesn't want to tell you all this stuff or makes it very hard to find it. So, if you dig, you can find it. It's 12 megapixels, and basic lens is it's a wide angle lens. These are 35 millimeter camera equivalents, 26 millimeters, and big lens openings. So this is like how you get bokeh on portraits, you know, the blurry background. So this is not good for depth of field. And then you get a JPEG file out of it. You don't want to use the JPEG for your processing because every time you do anything to a JPEG and save it, it's deteriorated. So you want to convert it to something. I use TIFF, and that's what I do all my processing on. The closest that I can focus is about 3.5 inches. So let's go through what you have to do with the manual method, which I no longer use, which is very difficult to get good results from. And that's because it involves two things. One, a lot of handling of the camera, because every time you fix a focus point, you have to press on the screen and hold it until the camera tells you the focus is locked. And you're doing that for multiple shots. So each time you do it, there's a jiggle to it. It's very difficult to mess it up. And the more the images don't align, the more likely you are to get artifacts and other problems. So the other problem is just that the screen's so small. How do you figure out, you know, where to put all the focus points and space them out? So it's difficult. Nonetheless, you can get, you know, decent results. You do have to watch out, by the way, for you don't realize how many little strange pieces of junk are floating around in your lab until you take close-ups. Like here's a little tiny piece of styrofoam that somehow got loose from a scenery project and wound up on the street. Didn't know until I looked at this picture. Anyhow, these are some examples of pictures I took. You can take pictures of other people's layouts very easily because just plunk the camera down and you know, and do your thing, and it's not disruptive. You're not lugging equipment in, tripods and light stands and whatnot. This is on Hart Corbett's layout, an HO scale, which no longer exists. And this picture here, you'll notice that I've done something different, and I'll get back to that later on. So fortunately, prior to giving a clinic actually in 2021, I discovered a godsend, Camera Pixels. It's an app that you put on your phone that automates the whole process for you of acquiring the images. And all you have to do is set some parameters and throw the shutter once, and it takes care of changing the focus, throwing the shutter, changing the focus, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got your images, and the camera has not moved in the whole process. It's available for both Android and iOS. So here's how it works. Here's this guy changing his tire. You've got camera pixels on your screen, and this is the shutter thing if you were to do it manually. There's two things that you have to set, the mode and this thing called set. And here's the mode menu, and you select focus bracket. They call it focus bracket instead of focus stack. Then you go over to the set menu, and you tell it how many images you want, and you have 5 to 100. I take 15. If you want to take little insects or something, complicated like that, you might want closer to 100. So 15 seems to be the number that works for me. Maybe it's not all that critical, but a reasonable number. So because you want to make sure that there's overlap on the depth of field. You don't want any gaps. And then you want to minimum distance. It asks you, and I always go for 0%, which tells you that you want to take the closest possible is where you want to start the focus. And then the maximum, you go, I've experimented, I think it's easier to just go with 100%, because if there's some stuff you don't need, you can always take them off the list. It's better to have more things that you've acquired, more images or more acquired than less, because you can always remove it. If you don't take enough, you have to go back and take the pictures all over again. So here's our guy, and now he's surrounded by a world of sharpness, maybe even more than we want. So that's how that works. So let me step us through an actual layout scene, just to show you that you basically, what I do is I walk around looking for scenes. I picked one here. I actually set it up because I wanted to do a demonstration. I've got locomotives and other objects at different distances from the camera. Plus I've got stuff in the background. And so this I would consider a test of how well this can work. So you get this set up with the camera pixels. You want to make sure when you compose that you leave extra space around the edges. It's you'll see why in a minute. Then you take the pictures and get it to your focus stacking software. In this case, it's Photoshop, and this is what you get. So everything is in focus here, and you've got that, or at least enough, and you've got this band of blurry stuff all the way around, and that's from the focus breathing, because basically as the software resize the images, what happens is that things around the edges get screwed up and don't get enough information to make a sharp image. So you have to crop that out. And also right here, a little too close to the camera, didn't quite get sharp, so you want to crop that out. So that's your next step, is cropping, and this is a little tilted as well. There's an aspect ratio that you need to think about. Do you want to maintain the same aspect ratio or not? And that's something that your photo editing software, whichever you're using, is going to tell you. So this is kind of what we came up with. So just to talk about the cropping again real quickly, this is Photoshop, this is Helicon Focus, same images. And you can see on the Photoshop one, there's this border that's not sharp all the way around. It's not there on the Helicon Focus version because they've already eliminated it. So you can see that this little gap here is smaller than over here. So just it makes it a little easier. Another reason to use Helicon Focus. And I wanted to also show you, again, just demonstrate how different the pictures are when you take the pictures from down here. Because if you flip this camera over, which is what I did in the next picture, just turn it upside down so that the camera is higher up, it looks totally different. It's not bad, it's just different. So if you want to have that other look, it really helps to use the smartphone. So you do have to fix some things, and that's what we're gonna talk about the rest of the time. Artifacts are important. It's interesting that all the articles that I've read in the model railroad magazines, when they talk about focus stacking, they don't tell you about artifacts. They are there. I don't know why they don't. They've got to see them, right? It's not a perfect process, so you have to sometimes fix it. And the people, the real focus stacking mavens, especially the macro photographers, they spend more time fixing artifacts than anything else. Backgrounds and backdrops have their problems. We'll talk about some of them, like the fact that brush marks, or if you use a roller, you get the little stipple thing. The camera doesn't lie. If you want to get a good focus, all that stuff shows up and it's kind of distracting. Sometimes because of the low angle that you're at, you run out of backdrop and it kind of spoils the picture. And then I'll get into some more radical things that probably stretch the boundaries about what's an allowable model railroad picture in terms of contests and whatever. I won't really talk much about lighting, but the subject will come up. So here's an old picture I found, specifically because it has a lot of artifacts. I took this with an SLR, actually. and a number of things. This is what I'm not sure how well this shows up, but if you don't get the overlap on the pictures on the different focus spots, you can get a band of blur between two of them. Fortunately, camera pixels prevents that. But you notice the common ones are just these fuzzy things. They're called halos, and the software just couldn't identify a sharp enough image for one, or maybe there's another layer in there that has an out of focus item that when they're out of focus, they expand in size. So you get these little fuzzy spots, and they're fixable. Then you got a transparency problem. If you look carefully, it looks like this caboose extends in front of this handrail, which is not true, of course. But what's happened is that the handrail was too transparent or in there, and that's why it's called a transparency problem. So you need to look and fix for there's a whole series of names used for these different kind of artifacts, but I think we pretty much covered that. So there's three basic things that you can do to try to deal with them. One, this doesn't, sometimes this helps if you can, if you're using Helicon Focus or Zarine stacking, you can just try another computational method, and maybe it works better. That option isn't available if you're using one of the regular edit packages. Or if you're in Photoshop, you can, remember those little masks? You can edit them. And basically, if you identify which of image that part is coming from, and you can use a black brush to wipe it off, to cover it up on the mask, and then you find another image, you hope, where that same area looks better, and then you use a white brush to include that instead. So it's kind of tedious, though, I have to tell you. It's not for everybody. Or if for both the Affinity and Helicon Focus software packages, you can basically overwrite the crummy looking part with a better version of it from a different image in a very more simple manner. So then if nothing works, you can just do some clone work and cover up. If you find something else on the image that's similar, you can cover it up, cover up the bad one with the good one. So I'm not going to read through this, but just it's basically what I said about the Photoshop thing. Photoshop will tell you where which image the area that you're concerned about comes from, and that speeds up the process. That tells you which mask that you have to work on. You just kind of put your cursor over it, right click, and it gives you the name of that file. So Helicon Focus is a little simpler. There's a retouch folder that panel that you select, and you get a brush menu. You basically this is your composite, your final rendered version. You find out which image it comes from by again putting the brush cursor in that spot, and there's two cursors that are there. They're yoked together. So you can go over to the alternate and kind of brush it, and it automatically covers up the halo or whatever it is you're concerned about. So that's kind of I think the preferred way of doing this. So here's an example of doing that with Helicon Focus. This is an image that won a prize at the PCR, but probably nobody noticed that there's artifacts on it. And I have them pointed out with these arrows. You can see this blurry stuff right here. And here's some more blurry stuff here, not as bad. This is the worst blurry stuff. And then this thing here is actually in real life longer than that. You can't, if you look real carefully, you might see a kind of a hint of something in here. So the software was unable to clarify that. So I went and did the Helicon Focus repair, And there it is. So you notice this thing goes all the way up to here now, and you can see the corner, the blur's all gone. So it does, so you do have to spend some time, but there's also a practiced eye to it that sometimes people don't even see the artifacts. But this is one here that's a problem, and you probably can minimize it by when you're composing, if you're aware that these can happen. You've got a situation here where you have a backdrop in the distance, and then you've got handrails close up, and you'd like to have them both in focus. It's not possible because if you find an image where the backdrop is sharp, then the handrail on that image is out of focus to the point where it expands because it's blurry, it expands. So then it'll show up so it's very difficult. And I actually tried fixing it with both the mask edit, didn't work because you see when I put in the new stuff, it's got this kind of gray stuff, which was from the blurry handrails. And then the Helicon focus, you can see there's really no choices because here's the backdrop is sharp here and the handrails are sharp here, but blurry inside. But you can't find anything without the blur from the handrails in there to replace it with. So instead, you just, I'm going to skip this one for now. So instead, you just clone it. So you just use the clone tool to pick out some green, put, wherever, and this is sharp, and you just replace it. So that's what works for something like that. I want to go into backdrop problems. Sometimes backdrops are too sharp. Because here, if you close up here, to get this kind of backdrop effect, you have to do a little paintbrush work. Well, the trouble is, you leave little ridges and things, it's brush marks. And so it kind of spoils things because it interferes with these details that you want to see. So the best way that I've found to deal with that is just to start removing images from the back until you get more softened focus on the backdrop, but not so much that the stuff that you want sharp doesn't stay sharp. So that's what I've done there. I said in this case I reshot it, but I don't do that anymore. I just go to the furthest images, start taking them off one at a time, press the render button on Helicon focus. You can see the effect. That isn't enough. You uncheck another one, so it only takes a few minutes actually. So here's what it looks like. So everything is kind of softened in the back, but things that are important like this chain link fence, the fronts of the buildings and so forth are still sharp focus. So I think that improves that image a lot. Here's another backdrop problem. This is another photo that I got some kind of got an award for back in April. But I noticed that I'd heard the scuttlebutt was that one of the judges had commented that I didn't do anything about this backdrop seam here. He thought it was a corner. It actually wasn't a corner. It was some dripping something or other from 10 years ago. I had some kind of spill on an upper level and didn't realize it was dripping on the backdrop and I couldn't get rid of it. Also, because of uneven lighting, so I have LED bulbs. It's a multi-deck layout. There was a bulb over here somewhere, and it was causing uneven lighting. So I wanted to fix that, and I used a clone tool. While I was at it, I thought, well, gee, wouldn't it be nice if this dark area was a little lighter? So I did that at the same time, and here's what I came up with. So now all the streaking is gone, and this here looks a little closer to that. And I think that's an improvement. Now, what I also did was take off a couple of further images to soften the backdrop. And as a result, some of these buildings in the back here are not as sharp as they were before. But I think that's okay because it makes it you can see like the blades of here of this crossing gate, things like that. They show up better because the building in back is a little softer. So here's something from Tony Thompson's layout. I was again at op session. Op session's over. I say, can I take some pictures? And took in 10 minutes, I went around his layout with my little stand and the phone. And this one was my favorite. Unfortunately, you can, because of the angle, he ran out of backdrop up here. So just once again, just get out the clone tool and it's taken care of. This is on Ernie Simard's layout in Petaluma. I took a bunch, same thing, op session, and afterwards I went around taking pictures. This was my favorite one from what I got that day. But look at the backdrop. Now, first of all, it ends here, and then you see the bottom of another layer. But then there's also different lighting and kind of coming through the cracks and causing weird shadows. And here's a shelf bracket holding up the deck above it. Once again, I took the clone tool. This is in Photoshop. It's really good for that, and got rid of all that stuff. In addition, while I was doing that, I had to get close up, magnify to get the edge, make sure I didn't screw up the edging. And I found that there were halos all along there too that I didn't even see, so I got rid of them. So that one got better. But now comes the part where I break rules, okay, in terms of, I used to see in guidelines for submitting photos to contests, model railroad contests, stuff like that, is you're not, and everyone was concerned about the new digital photography and, creating things that aren't real. So this kind of pushes that boundary. But this picture here we saw before, this is what was really there. So there was some backdrop, and then Hart had a photo of the prototype that he used to build this structure. And so what I did is I took a photograph of sky and stuck it in back and included this little tree, these tree leaves also. So I solved the problem, but of course I raised other questions. I did something similar. I was at Bill Kaufman's State Belt op session. After the op session, went around, quickly taking various pictures. I took this one, which is, I decided on a slightly higher perspective for this one, but the backdrop wound up being at this funny angle and it just didn't look right. So I stuck a cloudy sky, probably typical San Francisco. And I also altered the contrast, made the contrast softer so that it looked more like a cloudy day kind of thing. But then this was a wild one. There was no backdrop to worry about at all, but a garage door and a bunch of floodlights. In addition, there's another bank of floodlights behind me. So you have two sets of shadows in the same picture. But I managed, so I had to not only stick a photo, it turns out I had an old photo of San Francisco Bay at sunset. So that's actually fortuitous. And, but I had to repaint the water surface because of the shadows. And so now I have one set of shadows at least. So I have light coming from here. And then here's my final one here. This one was even more complicated because these lines, the rigging of the ship, crossed over these distant objects. And just like I had in my example before, all kinds of mischief took place trying to figure out how to have the line be sharp in front of the buildings in back, and it didn't, so I do a lot of repair work. But in addition to putting sky in, so I came up with this. So maybe those are breaking the rules, I don't know. So what I want to deal with in the future as I close is the light issue. Virtually all of these pictures were taken with the available light in the layout room. And there's advantages to that. It's not usually very even, it's relatively soft, and and the cameras have no problem with exposure and stuff. They're very good in that level of light. But there are some problems that you can come up with. Backdrops, for example, as I mentioned, especially in a multi-deck layout, you've got lights under one deck, and it's different than the lights coming from the sides, and plus I think probably if you have a strip of LEDs, it's probably better. But if you have like on my layout, my lighting was constructed before such things existed, and it's LED now, but they're LED bulbs, and that's really awful. So I'm thinking about ways of conveniently bringing outside light sources in, but not to the point where you have to come in with a bunch of light stands and stuff. That defeats a lot of the advantage of using the smartphone. So I've got a little LED panel, a little small one that's supposed to be for Zoom meetings, and I'm going to start playing around with having some kind of clamp or bracket on it and shut off the layout lights and just use that. But we'll see. So that's it, the end. And let me stop the share. I don't know if there's any questions or anything. Let's see. Oh, you guys are just glued the camera to the layout. That's
yeah, folks. I didn't invite questions during the presentation because Ed has this one so well put together. It flowed very nicely. But unmute yourself and take turns asking questions.
Okay.
And you can raise your hand if if that works for you.
Okay. Let's see. I'm trying.
Hey, Ed, I just want to say thank you for doing the presentation. I missed it during the convention.
Oh, great. Well, I think this one is actually better than the one that I gave at the convention, and maybe because it's newer, and I've moved on quite a bit.
Yeah, I just downloaded the app as you were talking, so I'm going to give it a try.
Yeah. Now, Helicon Focus, by the way, folks should know they're in the Ukraine, and they started for a while there, a couple months ago, on their website. They were, like soliciting donations for various relief groups and stuff. But they, fortunately, I don't know where they're operating from, but they're still supporting the software and updating and so forth and so on. But they have some hardware products now that they can't ship. There's no way for them to ship it. So, like for your Canon or Nikon camera, they now have a little it looks like a little teleconverter that you put in before you put the lens on, but it's actually controls the lens, and you set some parameters and does what camera pixels does, basically.
Is Helicon Focus a freebie?
It's not free. In fact, it's now migrated to an annual license. So you license it for a year, and then you have to renew it. You still have the program works, but you don't have the ability to do a lot of stuff. You can make some simple pictures, but you can't retouch, like that retouch thing I was talking about, which is a really valuable tool. That's only activated if you pay the licensing fee. So it's around $80 or something in that range. But it's really worth it. It's certainly and on one costs about the same, around $100. Affinity costs in the same range. I think Photoshop Elements is around the same range. So Photoshop itself, though, unless you really are into this, into digital photography, do a lot of work of that type, Photoshop is a heavy financial commitment, a big time initial purchase, and then you have to pay a monthly subscription fee for whatever Adobe products you've decided to have. So that's, for most people, it's too much.
Hey, Ed, one other thing I noticed on your locomotive picture, you had a little bit of keystoning, and I end up with that a lot of times when I'm taking pictures. Any thoughts about minimizing that? It's just the camera angle, right?
Yeah. It's. Are you talking about the Boeing?
No, the diesel you had. It kind of looked like it kind of narrows as it went up, like the camera.
Oh yeah. That's a lens distortion, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not a software issue, although you can try to correct, in your photo editing package, they'll have lens correction things and perspective changes, and it's sometimes tough to that's one of the things you get that with any wide angle lens, but my impression is that that's one area where the DSLR or mirrorless cameras have superior optics, and they're not as bad. That's what I can see. But almost anybody that uses wide angle lenses runs into that problem. Architectural type stuff, for example. In fact, I'm starting to look at it when I'm watching movies now. it sometimes goes by so fast you don't notice it. But I'm starting to see the lack of consistent vertical lines in a lot of shots. So the other thing you can do to minimize it is to make sure that the camera is aligned vertically with the subject to begin with, because if it's tilted back or forward, that makes it worse. But I don't have a total answer for that, other than cropping out the sides, trying to do that. Any other?
I have some, Ed.
Yeah.
Now, Camera Pixels Lite simply automates the process of picture, modify focus, picture, modify focus, picture, modify focus. So
Right.
the output of Camera Pixels Lite is a stack of photos stored in the cell phone, or in my case, I'd use my iPad. That's all that Camera Pixels Lite does. Is that correct?
That's correct. It doesn't process. It doesn't do the focus stacking process that the render or whatever we want to. Yeah, it's the image acquisition part of it. It's not the creating the final image part of it.
Right.
Now there are some apparently some cameras that do that all inside. I wouldn't want to do that though, because from what you learn is that there's so many little things that turn up, like artifacts and whatnot. You really have to have a human intervention to screen for that stuff and make modifications or edits and stuff. So I would never feel, and then you don't have, and in order to do them right, you have to have the stack of pictures. You go back to them. In fact, I stopped for a while there. I was just, once I'd get my final picture, I'd get rid of. Well, I don't have space to keep all this stuff. But then later, if I wanted to, as I learned something and I saw something I wanted to change or fix, I'd have to shoot the whole thing over again in order to be able to modify it. So now I save the stacks. Fortunately, in Bridger or Lightroom, they have a little option, so they actually group it together in its own folder. So at least you don't drive yourself nuts trying to remember which, go with what. Camera pixels, I tell you that acquiring the image is the hardest part. And that's why Camera Pixels is so good.
I've got more questions, but I'd like to let somebody else take a turn. Who else would like to, has questions that came up during the presentation?
I don't know. My own comment is I just acquired a Pixel 6, which kind of to sort of learn all of the features in order to try and get into this.
Yeah, well, and from what I understand, the Camera Pixels does have an Android version, so that shouldn't be a big problem. One thing let me go back to the other thing is, I just wanted to say that a lot of high-end cameras now are coming with features to do what Camera Pixels does. So I have a Nikon Z6, and there's actually they give it a different name, but it's the same idea. It's obscure in that it doesn't really, the instructions are very vague about how to set it up. So you have to find YouTube videos on how to use the dang thing. but it's kind of eerie because once you do that, you have your camera sitting there on its tripod and you just kind of, activate the shutter and you watch as the lens barrel rotates and then there's a sound and then it rotates again. It's really odd. But that's what Helicon Focus has done also. And well, I don't know whether we'll ever see those products. So who knows?
I see that Photoshop Elements is $99, and Earl just looked at Helicon website, $55 for a 1-year license.
Oh, it's only 55. Okay.
That's what Earl just looked up there.
Great.
Yeah, you can find Photoshop Elements every now and then on sale for as low as $69.99.
And but that would be for a permanent license rather than this extract money every year forever.
That's correct. Yeah, that's actual. So you can't do that with Photoshop anymore. There's no way to buy Photoshop and then make a decision about whether to upgrade it. You can't do that. You have to, it's called Creative Cloud is the Adobe name for it. You have to subscribe to Creative Cloud to get the updates on Photoshop.
I would make a rude gesture to that whole business model we're seeing on software.
Yeah, it has advantages and disadvantages. For me, it's worth it because it's only $10 a month, and I never have to worry about updates because they update it automatically. But then I'm using it all the time. It's every month I'm using Photoshop. But that's why On1 has gotten so popular, because it's a great program and you just buy it. And then and when you purchase it, it gives you so many months or years of free updates or something like that. So they notify you when an update is available, and it's a lot cheaper. And of course, Photoshop Elements is a lot cheaper. So and Affinity is also, same thing, around the same price area. That seems to be the, it's, but I'm really been converted to Helicon Focus as having the superior photo stacking processing, kind of arrangement. It's just, it's just so easy to use and it's so fast.
Now, Ed, this may be a personal question, but have you considered a 12-step program for photography?
Well, it's funny. If you look in the back of me right now, just notice that you have a kind of a microcosm of my life, apart from my professional life, which is gone now. And you've got a train layout, and then you have a music stand. And then on the lower right there, you can see a little handle. It's actually a little traveling photography equipment suitcase that I now keep out in the open in case we have to evacuate in a wildfire. So it's kind of all in one place. So I have multiple addictions.
Ed, thank you so much for sharing this excellent clinic, revised and improved as it is. I assume folks can ask more questions of you later if anything further comes up. And we will now open the floor for general discussion. But again, thanks so much, Ed. This was a great clinic.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right, so unmute yourself and let's start what modeling have you gotten up to this since this our last gathering? Any interesting projects or problems that need some either condolences or problem solving? How about it, folks? Oh, yes, Joyce.
Well, I don't have a problem, but I just came back from a wonderful trip, a road trip, and I saw a bunch of train um, things and took a bunch of train rides all over the Southwest. I went to the Grand Canyon. I rode the Grand Canyon train. There's a train at the Grand Canyon. I went to the the National Garden Railway Convention in Denver, Colorado. I went to, my favorite was the Promontory, which I'm wearing their t-shirt. The Golden Spike where the trains came together. It's a national monument now, and they do a reenactment of the promontory where the Golden Spike was put in Utah, above Salt Lake City at Promontory. And it was super cool, funny enactment. And I took a video of that. And they have a thing you can drive to, and you drive and you can stand in the very spot where the workers actually did the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. And you can see how difficult it was to build that. You're in the middle of absolutely nowhere. There's no water, there's no plants. To see that and to walk in the footsteps of the people who built that is pretty amazing. And then we went to Durango and Silverton. We went to Cumbres and Toltec. We went to the Rio Grande Railroad. We went to the Grand Canyon Railroad, whole bunch of railroads. And then on the way home, we saw the Tehachapi Loop in person. And that is really worth seeing. They have a new monument there and a place to stand. It used to be you had to kind of stand on the hillside and cars would come along and stuff. So it's really cool. I have a video. Just as we were about to give up and leave, we hear this train whistle, and here comes this train, and it's got like 6 or 7 locomotives, and it just goes on forever. The train took half an hour to get through the loop, and you see it cross over itself. It's just super cool. But my favorite thing is Promontory, because that's possible. It's above Salt Lake City, and you can drive to that fairly easily, and it's really worth the trip. So, and
did you ride that Cumbres and Toltec?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was on the equipment train that brought the equipment over the mountain
Wow.
way back in the 70s. And just outside Chama, a huge boulder washed down on the track, and they had to send a carry-all out to fetch us. It was quite an experience.
I'll bet. Huh. Huh. And I wanted to thank Ed. I've seen, I'm a photographer also, and I've seen a lot of videos and things about focus stacking. None of them made sense to me until I saw yours today. Really well organized, really put into good terms for somebody who's not too terribly technical. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to hear that. It actually is a work in progress in terms of the organizing part. It
made
better.
sense. It flowed really nicely.
I've got to learn how to unlock the potential in the new camera phone without rooting it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Ed, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
That little stand that you have, that little metal guy, and it has a clamping screw.
Right.
Who was the vendor for that?
That is Really Right Stuff. They make tripod heads, and primarily, and they're high end actually. Their tripod heads are some of the most expensive around, but also some of the most highly rated. And that's a little clamp that allows you to snap your phone into one of their tripod heads. So it's really, I really like it a lot. It as I mentioned, so it's got a little extra height to it that my little homemade plastic one didn't have, but it's heavy, so it kind of, you know, I put a piece of tape on the bottom of it in case I accidentally forget and leave it on some track, you know, turn on the power. Yeah. But yeah, it's so, and I don't remember how much it costs, but it's probably about the same amount of money as buying Helicon Focus or licensing, something like that, you know, around $70 or something.
Sounds like a good 3D printing project.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure that people could make you know, stands and mounts that are even better. For example, there's no way to turn the camera up for a portrait type angle, which doesn't come up as much, but it's nice to have that option. But that clamp won't do it because it won't open far enough.